The wind outside howled like a starving beast, clawing at the frost-laced windowpane of the tiny cottage nestled at the edge of Blackthorn Forest. The moon, swollen and silver, hovered just above the skeletal treetops, spilling its ghost light over the frozen land like a secret waiting to be whispered. Inside, the room was silent, almost sacred in its stillness. A small hearth crackled feebly in the corner, throwing trembling shadows against the stone walls. Threads of winter air slithered through every crack, but the woman who stood near the window didn't seem to feel the cold. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned forward, her eyes locked on the moon as though it held answers she hadn't dared to ask. Her name was Sasha, a seamstress, a servant, a nobody in the eyes of her pack. She had no noble blood, no lineage worth remembering. She spent her days stitching garments for others, mending cloaks she could never afford, and hiding in corners so no one would see too much of her, just the way it had always been. But tonight was different. Her hands trembled as they clutched a small white stick, the faint pink lines staring back at her like a truth she couldn't erase. Her lips parted in disbelief, but no sound escaped her. Positive. She was pregnant, and yet she had never lain with a man. Her throat tightened. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the crackle of fire, the wind outside, even her own breath. Panic warred with denial inside her chest. No, it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. She would remember, wouldn't she? She stumbled backward, dropping the test onto the worn wooden table beside her. It landed with a soft tap, but to Sasha it was deafening, like the tolling of a bell that marked the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. The dreams. For weeks now, she'd been haunted by them, vivid, visceral things that left her waking with her body aching and her skin damp with sweat. Dreams of heat and silver eyes, of a voice that soothed and scorched all at once. A voice that whispered her name like a vow and a warning. A voice that made her chest ache with a longing so fierce it frightened her. But they were just dreams, weren't they? She'd told herself that, over and over, until tonight, until the test, until the truth she couldn't outrun cracked open like a wound in her soul. She wrapped her arms around herself and stepped away from the table. Her gaze swept the room as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. No one came, but something had changed. She felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the quiet thrum that had started pulsing beneath her skin the moment she saw the test. Her eyes dropped to her wrist, and that's when she saw it, a mark, small, faint, shimmering like moonlight through fog. It hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. It looked almost like a crescent, cradling a tiny star. Her breath hitched. She reached out to touch it with trembling fingers, but the moment her skin made contact, a wave of heat surged through her. Not pain, not exactly, but something raw and wild and ancient. Something that didn't belong in her world of thread and needles and silence. The baby inside her kicked, and the pulse beneath the mark began to beat. Faster, louder, like a drum calling her somewhere she couldn't yet see. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly, and that's when she heard it. A voice, low and rough, like gravel and velvet and broken promises, whispering through the cold. Come back to me, my mate, before it's too late. Chapter 1. The wind had teeth in Blackthorn. It gnawed through timber and threadbare cloaks, rattled shutters like bones, and whispered things no one dared to repeat. In the heart of that frost-bitten village, nestled between thick pines and the jagged cliffs that touched the sky, lived Sasha Vale, a woman with hands calloused by needlework and eyes that never stopped searching the horizon. She woke before the sun, as she always did. No roosters crowed in Blackthorn, only the mournful howl of wolves echoing from beyond the ridge. The cold was a constant companion here, creeping into the joints and souls of those too poor to leave. Sasha rose from her straw mattress with a practiced shiver, pulling her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her fingers, raw and pink from the endless sewing, ached before they even touched the linen. But she worked anyway, mending tunics, stitching bandages, patching boots for men who'd never know her name. This was her life. Quiet, gray, forgotten. The hearth in her Aunt Delra's cottage sputtered weakly, just enough to keep the frost from creeping across the floorboards. Delra stirred a pot of broth, thick with roots and bitter herbs. Her mouth, always pursed in judgment, barely moved as she spoke. "You'll see Bram again today. Don't shame me." Sasha nodded, eyes on her hands. Delra didn't care for answers. She only cared for obedience. Bram was kind in a distant, safe way, a soldier with more muscles than words. Their engagement was a pact forged not in affection, but in expectation. Delra believed it would redeem Sasha, erase the stain of her mother's mysterious death, erase the whispers. But Sasha, she didn't want redemption. Not that kind. Not through marriage to a man who never made her heart skip. Not through silencing the strange things that lived inside her. Dreams that clung like spider silk, visions that left her gasping. The villagers talked. They always did. She stares at the moon too long. Talks to herself. Carries herbs no proper seamstress should touch. They never said it loud, but the word hung in the air whenever she passed. Cursed. The snow pup she rescued, small, silver-furred and shivering, was the only creature that met her eyes without suspicion. She found him half dead near the river bend 2 moons ago. Against Delra's fury, she kept him hidden beneath the wood pile, feeding him scraps and wrapping him in her old shawls. He was growing quickly, too quickly. His eyes were wrong for a pup, wise, almost knowing. Sasha didn't understand it, but she couldn't turn him away. He was the only warmth in her world. The same couldn't be said for the rest of the pack. Blackthorn was ruled with cold discipline. Traditions, hierarchy, alpha above all. Kalen Duskbane. His name was barely spoken anymore. The alpha who vanished. 6 months ago, he'd ridden into battle against rogue shifters in the south. He never returned. No funeral, no body, just silence. His disappearance left a hole in the heart of the territory, a power vacuum filled by whispers and fear. Councilmen bickered behind closed doors. Subordinate alphas jostled for control. And in the village, people braced for collapse. But not Sasha, because she saw him, not in daylight but in dreams. A tall figure with silver eyes that cut through the dark like blades. A voice, deep, broken, calling her name like it was the last word he'd ever speak. And always the same ending. Fire, blood, and a promise. Come back to me. Sasha never told anyone. Not about the dreams. Not about the mark. The crescent moon over her heart pulsed beneath her skin like a heartbeat. It had been there as long as she could remember, but Delra warned her never to show it. Hide it. Always, she hissed once, grabbing Sasha's wrist so hard she left bruises. You don't want them thinking you're one of them. She never explained. Never had to. In Blackthorn, difference meant danger. Magic meant exile. Or worse. So Sasha obeyed. She stitched. She smiled. She kept her secrets buried beneath linen and silence. But the dreams grew sharper. The child inside her grew stronger. And something old, older than blood or bone, was beginning to stir. It began with the forest. One night, Sasha woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding like hooves in her chest. The dream had been clearer this time. No longer fragments. A full vision. She stood in a forest, ancient, wild. Trees like towers, moonlight painting silver paths through the dark. And there he was, Kalen, his eyes locked with hers, filled with agony. A wound bled across his chest, clawed deep. He reached for her. Sasha, he whispered, voice cracking. You have to remember. You have to find me. And then the fire. The forest burned. Flames roared around them. A scream tore from her throat as she was pulled backward, away from him, into a void of cold wind and white light. She woke gasping, clutching her belly. The baby kicked. A pulse of heat bloomed beneath her ribs. Her hands flew to her chest. The mark was glowing. She ran outside, barefoot, into the snow. The sky was black. Stars scattered like shattered glass. The moon, round and pale, hung low, closer than it should have been. The pup barked softly from the shadows. She dropped to her knees, the snow biting into her skin. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the wind held around her. "Who are you?" she whispered into the dark. "What am I?" No answer came. Only the wind, only the moon, only the sense that something terrible was coming, and she was at the center of it. The next day, Sasha tried to speak to Delra, to ask about her mother, what really happened. But Delra slapped her. Hard. Her voice shook with fury. "Some truths are better left buried." Sasha bled from the corner of her mouth. But she didn't cry. She just looked at the woman who raised her and realized she was more alone than she'd ever been. Later, at the village square, Bram approached her. He held out a small bouquet of frost-bloom flowers, clumsy, awkward. He smiled. "I thought of you." She forced herself to take them, forced herself to thank him, but her hands were trembling. He noticed. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but her heart screamed no, because in that moment, as the snow fell soft around them, all she could think of was the man from her dreams, the one who knew her name, the one she couldn't remember but felt in her bones. Kaelin. That night, another vision. This time she was running. Her feet pounded against wet earth. The air was thick with ash. Behind her, wolves howled. Dozens of them, chasing her through the burning woods. Ahead, a clearing. Kaelin stood waiting, his eyes hollow, his body broken. She reached him. His hands touched her belly. A spark passed between them. His voice shook. "They've bound us. But the child will bring you back." Then his eyes rolled back and he fell, dead. Sasha screamed, and woke up with blood on her sheets. She stood in the mirror the next morning, pale as the snow outside, her nightgown stained, her lips trembling. The mark over her heart glowed faintly like dying embers. The baby kicked again, harder. A message, a warning, or both. And from somewhere deep inside her, a truth began to take root. This wasn't just a dream. This wasn't just a mistake. She was carrying the Alpha's child, and someone had taken her memories to hide that truth. Chapter 2. The cold came before the news did. A biting, unnatural frost rolled down from the mountain like breath from a slumbering god. The air sharpened with it, crisp, metallic, humming with something too old to name. Blackthorn was used to cold, but this chill carried teeth. It slid beneath doors, coiled in chimney smoke, and whispered through the bones of wolves. Sasha woke before dawn to a strange silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell like ash, thin, quiet, relentless, and every flake that touched her skin made her flinch. She stood barefoot outside her cottage, one hand on her swelling belly, the other pressed to the wooden doorframe to steady herself. Her nightgown whipped around her legs, threadbare, the hem soaked in frost. And still she did not move, because she felt it. Something shifted. It wasn't pain, not like the strange cramps that came when the baby stirred. No, this was something else entirely. It was a tug deep in her chest, a pull that wasn't physical but visceral, a pressure blooming behind her sternum like a rising tide. Her heart stuttered, caught, and then thundered forward as though it had just remembered what it was made for. And her mark, silent for weeks, flared. The skin just beneath her collarbone, above the left swell of her breast, seared like a brand. She dropped to her knees, gasping. Snow melted against her skin in thin, hissed spirals. The pup, a ghost-colored scrap of fur she'd named Thistle. whined low behind her, pawing the door. Sasha barely heard him. Her eyes were wide, wild, locked on something far away. She didn't know what had happened yet, but something in the world had changed, and her soul had noticed. They brought the news 2 hours later. A scout, pale-faced and shaking, rode into the village on a lathered horse. His voice cracked like ice under boot when he spoke. The Alpha had returned. Kaelin Duskbane, alive, injured, and changed. The words slipped through the village like smoke. Whispers first, then gasps, then the strange hush of something ancient being disturbed. Blackthorn had not seen its Alpha in 7 moons. The last time anyone had laid eyes on him, he had ridden north with his elite guard to confront something. No one knew what, and hadn't come back. Until now. Sasha gripped the worn edge of the healer's table, trying to steady her hands. But her pulse wouldn't slow. It was him. She knew it without knowing how. It was him, the man from her dreams, the voice that whispered in her sleep, the shadow that bled into her waking hours, drenching everything in a hunger she couldn't explain. She'd thought he was just a phantom, a figment, some cruel joke of a lonely mind. But her body had known, and her child had known. It was him, Kaelin. She stumbled back to her cottage, ignoring the questions Bram called after her. The world tilted as she walked. Her breath misted in front of her, too fast, too shallow. Every step felt like wading through something thick and invisible. She reached her door and dropped to her knees once again. The mark burned hotter. A heartbeat later, the summons came. They needed a seamstress. The Alpha had returned injured. His ceremonial robes, rich with silver threads and stitched with the sacred sigil of their ancestors, had been damaged during his absence. The estate sent for Sasha. It was supposed to be a simple task. It was anything but. She arrived hours later, bundled in her warmest wool, but still cold to the marrow. The estate gates stood open, tall, wrought iron things with ivy frozen in spirals along their frame. Guards flanked the stone archway. Not the usual ones. These men were tense, twitchy. Their hands never strayed far from their hilts. The estate loomed ahead like a waiting predator. All dark stone and slanted roofs, its windows flickering with low firelight. The snow had been cleared from the steps, but not recently. A strange set of clawed prints led up the path and vanished through the front door. No one greeted her. She was shown in by a servant who would not meet her eyes. The interior was colder than the outside. The hearths were lit, yes, but the heat seemed unable to settle. The walls whispered as she passed. Shadows danced longer than the flames warranted. The further in she walked, the heavier the air became, like walking into a room filled with old grief. They led her to a room just off the Alpha's private wing. The moment she stepped through the threshold, her knees nearly buckled. He was there, not in the flesh, not yet, but his presence soaked the space like stormlight. His scent clung to the air, wild cedar, ozone blood. It struck something primal in her. Her hands trembled. Her breath came shallow. She blinked and the room flickered. For a heartbeat, she wasn't standing in a stone chamber. She was somewhere else, naked under moonlight, wrapped in arms that made her whole. A voice calling her name like it was a prayer. Then it was gone. The servant left her alone. She worked in silence. Her fingers remembered the pattern before her mind did. The sigils were old, sacred. Every stitch meant protection. Every thread carried power. She didn't think. She just moved, until the door opened behind her, and her world shattered. He entered like a storm with no thunder. Tall, broad, scarred. His coat hung from one shoulder. Snow still clung to his boots. His eyes were shadowed, and silver. God's eyes. Silver like the edge of a blade, like the reflection of the moon on still water. He looked at her, and something inside him cracked. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. And she couldn't breathe. It was him, The man from her dreams. The man she didn't know, but also somehow did. He looked at her like she was a ghost. A miracle. A mistake. And then pain. His hand went to his temple. A gasp escaped his lips. He stumbled back half a step as if struck. And in her mind, something unraveled. A forest. Fire. His voice, broken, begging her to live. Her name, screamed across a battlefield. Her own voice, whispering, "I'll come back to you." And blood. So much blood. She dropped the needle. Her mark blazed white-hot. Kalen's voice rasped across the room, a whisper torn from somewhere far deeper than his throat. "They said you were dead." Sasha fled. She didn't wait, didn't think. She ran, down the corridor, past startled servants, through the estate doors and into the snow. She ran until her lungs burned, until her belly ached, until the howl in her chest grew too loud to bear. And still she ran, because if she stopped, she would remember, and remembering might kill her. Chapter 3. The night was heavier than usual. It pressed against the walls of her cottage, heavier than the snow, more oppressive than the frost. Inside, the fire flickered weakly, throwing shadows that danced and twisted like they had secrets to tell. Sasha lay in her bed, her fingers clutching the sheets in tight, desperate fists, as though the world might slip away if she didn't hold on tight enough. The air felt thick, laden with something she couldn't name but could feel moving in the dark corners of her mind, crawling in the spaces between her heartbeat. And then the dreams returned. They had never left her completely. These nightmares, these whispers of a life she didn't remember. But now they were sharper, deeper. Now they hurt. Sasha could feel him before she saw him. A man, a shadow that stretched across time itself, pressing into her soul with a weight that took her breath away. His silver eyes burned through the dark, just like they had when she first saw him at the estate, cold, intense, as if they saw through her skin, through her bones, through the places where her secrets were buried deep. His voice was a murmur at first, barely more than a low, growling echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But it wasn't just a voice. It was a sensation, a vibration that surged through her very blood. "Come back to me." She saw him then, his body, bruised and bloodied, but impossibly strong. The alpha, her mate, her bond. He was kneeling before her under a sky so dark it seemed to swallow them whole. His hands trembled as they reached for her, his touch almost desperate. She felt the ache in his chest as if it were her own, the longing, the want, the burning desire to touch, to feel, to make it all stop, to make the distance between them collapse. But then it twisted. Pain. His pain. Her scream mixed with his as a terrible force tore through their bond, ripping it apart, shattering it into fragments of silver light that fell like burning stars around them. And then everything went silent. Sasha's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. She was awake now, but the echoes of the dream clung to her like smoke, filling her lungs with the scent of his blood, his pain, his need. And in that moment her heart twisted, as if it knew something she didn't. She was not alone. The pain she had felt in the dream was real. The bond was real, and it was breaking. The next morning, she awoke to the sound of her own voice calling out in a hoarse whisper, as if the words had come from somewhere deep inside her. She touched her lips, as if expecting to feel him there, expecting to feel something. Instead, a sharp pain gripped her stomach. At first, it was subtle, a pressure, a discomfort that felt too familiar, like the time before she knew the truth. But then it worsened, spreading like a fire, and her body trembled with the realization of what was happening. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she crumpled to the floor. The pain was blinding, and for a heartbeat, she thought she might lose it all, everything. The child, the bond, everything. Her hand flew to her stomach, clutching at the bump that had become so familiar in the past few months, a part of her that had grown beyond her control. And then there was a rush, an instinct to protect, to hold it together. Somehow, She managed to gather herself enough to call for help. The healer, a woman old enough to have seen too many births, arrived soon after. Her wrinkled hands were steady, her expression unreadable as she examined Sasha. But it wasn't long before her face softened with relief. "The child is fine," the healer murmured, but there was a coldness in her eyes. Not normal, though. Sasha felt a chill deeper than the cold winds outside. What did that mean? What wasn't normal about the baby? Her thoughts spiraled, but the healer didn't elaborate. Instead, she handed Sasha a vial of something thick and dark, telling her to rest and drink it. It would help. But Sasha's mind was already far beyond what the healer said. Her thoughts scattered like ashes. She could barely focus on what was in front of her, on what was happening to her body. All she could feel was the echo of Kaelin's pain, still thundering through her chest. The visit left her drained, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She sank into her bed, her limbs heavy, her eyes closing as exhaustion took over. But the silence didn't last. There was a knock at the door, soft and hesitant. Sasha didn't answer. She didn't want anyone seeing her like this, so vulnerable, so open. But the knock came again, more persistent this time. She slowly dragged herself out of bed, barely able to hold herself upright as she walked to the door. When she opened it, the face of Lasara, a woman Sasha had never seen before, greeted her. Lasara's eyes were dark and knowing, her presence somehow too calm, too unshaken by the storm Sasha was drowning in. She stepped inside without invitation, her scent faintly floral with a sharp undercurrent of something ancient, filling the room. "I know what's happening to you," Lasara said, her voice low, deliberate. "I know what you've forgotten." Sasha blinked, confusion washing over her like a cold tide. What was she talking about? Forgotten? But before she could ask, Lasara spoke again, her words sharper, cutting through the fog. "You were once Kaelin, Duskbane's true mate," Lasara continued, "but your bond was erased. You were bound to forget everything." The room seemed to tilt, and Sasha felt her breath catch. Her knees nearly buckled, and she gripped the doorframe for support. She wanted to scream, to demand answers. But Lasara was already stepping forward, her eyes never leaving Sasha's face, as if she could read the terror rising within her. "It was done with magic," Lasara explained, "by someone who wished to break you both. And now it's beginning to unravel." The words hit Sasha like a punch to the gut. Kaelin, her mate, the man she had dreamed of, the man who haunted her every breath, every thought. And now Lasara was telling her that it wasn't just a dream. It wasn't some illusion. It was real. But why? Who could have done this? And why erase their bond? Sasha opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Lasara's next word stopped her. "Your mother died because of the same magic. She bonded with an alpha from another pack, and they killed her for it." Sasha felt the world tilt on its axis. Her mother? She had died because of this? Was it the same magic that had torn her and Kaelin apart? "Your Aunt Delra," Lasara continued, her eyes darkening. "She's hiding something from you. Something important. You need to ask her about your mother's death, Sasha. Ask her about the curse." The words landed like stones in the pit of Sasha's stomach. The woman who had raised her. The woman who had whispered nothing but bitterness about her mother's death. The woman who had always kept her distant from any kind of love or warmth. Lasara's eyes softened for a moment. "But there's more. The alpha is dying, Sasha. His body is rejecting his wolf. He's weakening, and I believe he needs you." Sasha's heart thudded in her chest as if to remind her it was still beating. Kaelin. She hadn't seen him since that day at the estate. She hadn't spoken to him since his pain had raked through her soul. And now he needed her. The truth hung between them like a fragile thread. But before Sasha could form a response, Lasara stepped closer. "There's a hidden room at the estate, Sasha. Your scent is there. Your clothing. Your handwriting. You were there once. You just don't remember." You need to find it. Sasha shook her head, her body stiff with disbelief. I can't. You will, Lysara said, her voice unyielding. You will, because everything is beginning to unravel, and the blood that binds you to him, it won't wait. With those final words, Lysara turned and left, leaving Sasha standing in the room, her breath shallow and frantic, her heart caught in the space between knowing and not knowing. The world outside was still cold, still silent, but in the deep places of Sasha's soul, something was stirring, something ancient, something forgotten, something that might just destroy her. And that was when she remembered the words from her dream, the last thing Kaelin had whispered. He marked me under the blood moon. He said we were eternal. Chapter 4. The air in Blackthorn was thick with silence, the kind that settled deep into the bones, that made the forest beyond the Pax estate feel like a living thing, watching, waiting. Sasha walked through the halls, her pulse thudding too loudly in her ears. The walls, lined with stone and shadow, seemed to close in around her, as if they, too, were conspiring to keep her from what she needed most, the truth. She had to see him again, had to know once and for all why the world felt wrong without him, why the memories clawed at her insides, fragments of things she shouldn't remember, shouldn't feel. She knew now. The bond between them had never truly broken. It had only been buried, hidden by someone who had feared it, feared them. Her steps quickened, but as she neared the council room, a figure stepped into her path. Elira. The sorceress was tall, regal, her presence as sharp and cold as the winter winds that howled outside. Her eyes, dark and calculating, narrowed as she regarded Sasha. There was no warmth in them, no trace of the woman who had once been a friend. You cannot go in there, Elira said, her voice low like a warning. Sasha's chest tightened, but she refused to back down. I need to speak to him, she said, her words harsh and raw, as if the mere act of saying them took all her strength. I need to understand what's happening to me, to him. Why? No, Elira interrupted, her voice hardening. You don't understand. This is not your place anymore. Leave him to me. Sasha's heart twisted. She had always known that Elira had a hold on Kaelin, a bond that was not unlike the one she'd shared with him. But this felt different. This wasn't just concern or loyalty. This was something else, something darker. But before Sasha could respond, a low growl echoed from within the council room. The doors were flung open, and there he was. Kaelin. His presence hit her like a wave. Her breath caught, her chest tightening as if the very air had been sucked from her lungs. He looked different now, broken, battered. His usual fierce confidence was gone, replaced by a weariness that sank into his bones, a weakness that wasn't his own. The room fell silent. The air itself seemed to grow heavy with the weight of their unspoken history. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Sasha stepped forward. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't know if she was about to shatter everything they had left, or if, in this moment, she was finally going to find what she had been searching for all this time. She reached out to him, her hand trembling as it hovered just above his arm. The moment her fingers brushed against his skin, a jolt of electricity shot through her, making her gasp. His body stiffened under her touch, and for a second she thought he might pull away. But then, as if drawn by some magnetic force neither of them could resist, they both fell into it, into the memory. The world around them twisted and blurred, like the fabric of reality was being unraveled at the edges. She felt herself being pulled into the past, into a moment so vivid, so real that it threatened to consume her entirely. It was a night like this, moonlight filtering through the trees, casting everything in a silvery glow. The air smelled of pine and earth, fresh with the bite of winter. But it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the man standing before her, his wild eyes burning with the same fire that had always lived inside her. Kaelin, don't leave me, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She looked up at him, her heart racing, as if it was the first time she had ever seen him, and yet it wasn't. It felt like she had known him for lifetimes. Her body responded to him instinctively, like a force of nature, like the moon had been calling her to him since the dawn of time. "I won't," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'll never leave you." And then he kissed her. It was a kiss unlike any other. A kiss that tasted like freedom and desperation. A kiss that spoke of promises made under the stars and blood that had yet to be shed. She felt the fire spread through her veins, felt herself being pulled into him, into the very soul of him, until there was nothing left but the two of them. They were one. But as quickly as the kiss began, it ended. She pulled away, gasping for air, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw the shadows creeping at the edges of the clearing, the distant howls of wolves marking the approach of the battle that would come. But it was too late. The bond between them had already been sealed. "I love you," she whispered, as if she could say it for all the moments they had lost, for all the pain they would endure. And he, his voice low and jagged, replied, "And I will find you, always." The world around them began to warp, the moonlit forest fading into the dark shadows of the present. Sasha gasped, pulling away from Kaelin, her hand still pressed against his arm. They were back in the council room now, the weight of the memory crushing them both. Her chest heaved, her breaths ragged. Kaelin's face was pale, his body trembling, as if the very act of remembering had broken him. His eyes, wide and haunted, locked onto hers. "Do you remember now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. His lips trembled, his jaw clenched as he tried to hold himself together. "I remember," his voice cracked, raw with emotion. "I never stopped looking for you, Sasha. I never stopped searching for you." Sasha's heart ached, a sharp, searing pain that made her feel like she might crumble under the weight of it. The memory of their bond, of the love they had shared, was alive now, burning in the space between them. And yet something else lingered in the air, a tension, a fracture in the magic that had once tied them together. Elira's voice broke through the silence, cold and sharp. "This was not supposed to happen," she said, her eyes flashing with something darker than anger. "The prophecy, it cannot be allowed to come true." Sasha's head spun. Prophecy? What was she talking about? Elira stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Kaelin. "You," she began, but her voice faltered as she looked at Sasha. "You were never meant to remember this. The prophecy said that Kaelin's true mate would die bearing his heir." The words struck Sasha like a physical blow. Her stomach twisted, nausea rising within her. She had always known there was something dark and dangerous surrounding her pregnancy, but this was worse than she could have imagined. Someone had cursed them. Someone had cast a shadow over their bond, over their future. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, the weight of the revelation settling over him like a storm cloud. "You did this?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "You." Elira held up a hand, a gesture that silenced him instantly. "It was necessary," she said, her voice cold and calculating. "The bond between you two could destroy everything. The prophecy must be kept. He cannot father an heir with you, Sasha. The cost is too great." Sasha could barely breathe, barely think as the room swirled around her. Prophecy, magic, death. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes filled with desperation, with need. "We can't let this happen," she whispered. "We have to fight it." Kaelin's hand reached out, trembling, and he cupped her face gently, his touch a balm against the storm that raged inside her. His voice was a low growl, filled with raw emotion. "I remember everything now. I remember you, Sasha, and I will not lose you again." And in that moment, Sasha knew. They were not just fighting for their bond, for their love. They were fighting for their very survival. The magic that had once torn them apart was cracking, and soon it would break free. Chapter 5. The night stretched before them like a wound, raw, open, and bleeding. The moon was rising, swollen and full, casting an eerie light over the land, a cold, merciless glow that reached into the deepest corners of Blackthorn. It was the blood moon, the omen, the reckoning, the night that would decide everything. Sasha lay in the dimly lit chamber, her body trembling violently, slick with sweat. The pain was unbearable, a fire that tore through her from the inside out. She gasped for air, her chest tightening with every contraction, each one harder, sharper than the last. The baby, the child inside her, Kaelin's child, was coming. But not in the way they had hoped, not in the way she had prayed. Her mind was a fog of terror and exhaustion, her thoughts scattered like fragments of a shattered dream. She had barely registered when the first wave of pain had hit, when her body had started betraying her, when the blood had come. But now it was too much to ignore. Too real, too wrong. Elira was there, her face pale, her hand shaking as she moved around the room, preparing something, a potion, a salve. The sorceress had been silent for too long, her guilt a palpable weight in the air. Sasha could see it now, in the way her eyes avoided hers, in the way her movements lacked the usual cold precision. "I'm sorry," Elira whispered, her voice cracked with remorse. "I didn't know. I thought I was protecting you, protecting him, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." Sasha could barely process the words. All she could focus on was the pain, the way her body twisted, the way her heartbeat hammered against her chest, as if trying to escape. And then another wave, stronger, more intense. She screamed, her hands clutching the sheets beneath her as if they could anchor her to reality. The door burst open, and Kaelin entered, his eyes wild, his hair disheveled, his body as tense as a drawn bowstring. His breath came in ragged gasps, his scent, sharp and feral, flooding the room. He was here. He was with her. But even in his presence, something felt wrong. Kaelin's gaze met hers, and for a moment everything else faded. His eyes locked onto hers, dark with something she couldn't name. Fear, guilt, desperation. But even as he reached for her, his hands trembling, she saw the conflict in his face, the struggle, the fight that had already begun in him. He knelt beside her, his hands brushing her damp hair from her forehead. "Sasha," he whispered, his voice raw, almost a growl. "I'm here. I won't leave you. I won't let you die." The words hit her like a lifeline, but she knew that nothing could stop the truth from coming, the truth that had been hanging over them since the first moment they had touched, since the first moment they had locked eyes and felt the bond crack wide open. She was dying. The prophecy, the curse, was not something that could be escaped. No matter how hard they fought, how deep their love ran, the magic, the blood, the shadow of their ancestors would come for them both. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Don't let it take him. Don't let him die." Kaelin's face twisted in pain, his jaw clenching as if the mere thought of losing her was more than he could bear. "I won't lose you, Sasha. I won't. Not again." But even as he spoke, his body shuddered, and a low growl escaped his throat. The wolf. It was awakening. Sasha could feel it, the shift in him, the power that coiled beneath his skin, growing stronger, more demanding. His wolf was clawing to break free, to take control, to do what needed to be done. The bond between them was pulling, pushing, forcing them both toward something neither of them could understand. The blood moon had risen, and with it, their destiny was sealed. Elira stepped forward, her hands trembling as she pressed something cool into Kaelin's palm. A ritual stone, a relic of his bloodline, of the ancient magic that bound them all. "This is the only way," Elira said, her voice tight. "The ritual, it's the only chance you have. If you don't challenge the curse, if you don't fight the spirit of the prophecy, Sasha will die. The child will die." Kaelin didn't hesitate. His eyes darkened with resolve, and he stood, his hand gripping the stone. His wolf surged beneath his skin, the transformation already beginning, his bones cracking, his muscles expanding. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. The ritual required something else, something darker. He had to enter the dream realm. He had to face the spirit of the prophecy itself, the shadow beast that had haunted his bloodline for centuries. Only then could he break the curse. Only then could he save Sasha and their child. "I'll do it," Kalen said, his voice hoarse, the words scraping against his throat like shards of glass. "I'll fight. I'll kill the beast." Sasha wanted to scream at him, to tell him to stay. But she couldn't. She couldn't speak. The pain was too much. The world was slipping away, drowning in the darkness. And then, as if by some force of magic, she was pulled into the dream realm. The world around her shifted, bending and warping, until she was no longer in the room with Kalen, no longer in Blackthorn. She was in a field of mist, cold and barren. The earth beneath her feet was cracked, like it had been torn apart by some ancient force. And there, standing before her, was the shadow beast. It was massive, its form flickering like smoke, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. It was a creature born of pain and blood, of broken bonds and shattered souls. Its presence was suffocating, a weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. And then she heard Kalen's voice, distant but clear, cutting through the mist like a knife. "I will save you, Sasha." And in that moment she knew. He was fighting for them, for her, for their future. But the battle was far from over. Back in the waking world, her body was racked with another wave of pain. She screamed, her eyes wide with terror as she felt her body tearing apart. The child was coming, but something was wrong. Something had gone horribly wrong. Sasha's vision blurred, the edges of her sight darkening as she felt herself slipping away. She could hear Kalen's voice, but it was fading like the very life that was slipping from her. The child, their child. She could feel it. It was still alive, but not for long. She was losing him, losing them. And then it happened. The room was filled with light, bright, blinding light. Kalen's wolf surged, his form fully shifting, his power crashing through him like a tidal wave. He was there, with her. Sasha's body convulsed with one final, violent spasm and then silence. The world around her faded to black. Chapter 6. The air was thick with the weight of history, the echoes of battles fought and lost, of curses undone and fates rewritten. The ancient tree stood before them, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like hands, yearning for the moon above. Its roots were as old as the land itself, buried deep in the earth, entwined with the bloodlines of all who had come before. This was where it had all begun, and now it was where it would all end, or perhaps where it would finally start anew. Sasha stood beneath the tree, the moonlight spilling down around her like liquid silver, bathing her in its ethereal glow. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the heartbeat of the world. It was the same pulse that thrummed in her own veins, the same rhythm that now bound her to Kalen, to the land, to the future they would carve together. The ceremony was simple, but no less powerful for its simplicity. The air was thick with magic, woven together by the blood of their ancestors, by the strength of their bond, by the love that had survived centuries of separation. She could feel the pull of it, the way her soul resonated with his, the way their marks burned as one. Kalen stood beside her, his presence a steadying force, the same man she had known, and yet not the same. He had returned to her not as the broken alpha who had once disappeared into the shadows, but as the true leader of his people. His wolf was no longer a burden to him. It was his strength, his power, his guiding force. He had claimed his throne again, but this time he would rule beside her with her, not above her, not separate from her. As the ceremony began, Kalen took her hands in his fingers warm against her skin. The world seemed to fall away, and for a moment there was nothing but them. The bond between them pulsed, a thread of light that wove them together, stronger than it had ever been before. "Sasha!" Kalen's voice was low, the words wrapped in meaning. "I remember now. Everything. every moment we shared, every promise we made. Sasha looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never forgot you," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of everything they had been through. "I never stopped loving you." His thumb brushed across her mark, the mark they had shared, the mark that had bound them even when they didn't know it. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "We are moonbound again. Forever." The air around them seemed to shift, the very fabric of the world bending and twisting as the magic of the blood moon coursed through them. It was like a wave crashing against the shore, pulling them under, pulling them deeper into the past, into the future. They kissed then, a kiss that was both a promise and a release, a sealing of all that had been broken and all that had been reborn. It was more than passion. It was a connection that defied time, that transcended everything they had suffered. A kiss that spoke of eternity. Above them, the moon shone brighter than ever before, a symbol of their rebirth. Their bond was no longer just a curse. It was a blessing. The curse had been broken, the prophecy defied, and now they would face the future together. And then, as if on cue, the world shifted again, the dreamlike quality of the ceremony giving way to the quiet reality of the moment. Elira, the sorceress who had once been their enemy, stood at the edge of the clearing, her face a mask of sorrow and resignation. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I only wanted to protect him, protect you both." Sasha nodded, her heart aching for the woman who had been lost in her own regrets. Elira had made her choice, sought redemption in the only way she knew how. But redemption, like everything else, had its price. "You're free now," Sasha said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "You've done what you can." Elira gave a final, sorrowful nod, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. And then, without another word, she disappeared into the shadows of the forest, leaving them behind to begin their new life. The moment lingered, a heavy silence filling the air as Sasha turned back to Kaelin. He had always been the alpha, the one who commanded the attention of the pack, the one who ruled with an iron fist. But now there was a softness in his eyes, a gentleness that had not been there before. His gaze met hers, and in it she saw everything, the pain of the past, the hope for the future, and above all, the love that had endured through it all. "I won't leave you again," Kaelin said, his voice raw, the weight of the promise heavy between them. Sasha swallowed hard, the words almost too much to bear. "And I won't let you go," she whispered, her hands clutching his tighter. "Not now. Not ever." The clearing was silent for a long moment, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. And then, slowly, Kaelin reached down, his hand resting on her belly, where their child lay, their son, their hope for the future. "We've been through so much," Kaelin said, his voice a low murmur. "But we're here now, together." Sasha smiled through her tears, her hand covering his. "Yes, together." And with that, the last of the darkness fell away. There would be no more curses, no more broken bonds, no more separation. The child they had conceived together, their son, would grow up in a world where love, not fate, would rule. The pack would be led by them, not by fear, not by prophecy, but by strength, unity, and the bond that had brought them together. The legacy of their love would live on, unbroken. Kaelin leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "We have all the time in the world now, all the time to make it right." Sasha nodded, her heart full as she pulled him into another kiss, this time sweet and tender, a promise for the future. She knew they would face challenges ahead. There would be struggles, doubts, and dark days, but as long as they had each other, nothing could tear them apart. The future was theirs to shape. The sound of footsteps interrupted the moment, and they turned to see Aunt Delra standing at the edge of the clearing. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even acceptance. "I have to leave," Aunt Delra said, her voice quieter than Sasha had ever heard it. "I can't stay here. Not after all that's happened." Sasha's heart tightened, but she nodded. "I understand." Aunt Delra looked at them both, her gaze lingering on the child growing in Sasha's belly. "Be happy. Be the family your mother always wanted you to be." And with that, Delra turned and left, disappearing into the distance. Sasha's eyes followed her aunt for a long moment before she turned back to Kaelin, her heart full of hope for the first time in her life. Their future was unwritten, but it would be theirs to define. The pack would thrive under their rule. No future mates would ever suffer as they had. The legacy of the Blackthorn pack would be rebuilt, stronger, kinder, united by the love that had once seemed impossible. And when she looked down at her son, now sleeping peacefully beneath the tree, she knew that they had all found their way back. "Together!" Sasha whispered again, her hand resting gently on her mark. "We found our way back." As the moon climbed higher in the sky, the light seemed to wrap around them, a glowing halo of protection. The world had changed, and so had they, and for the first time in a long while, Sasha could finally breathe. The journey was far from over, but at last they had come home.